China signals easing of some of its toughest COVID curbing restrictions, but it maintains it's still sticking to zero tolerance for the coronavirus. Key changes to the measures include reduced quarantine periods for close contacts of confirmed cases and inbound travelers. International flights into the country will also no longer be suspended. China as well is adjusting its risk area classifications with just high and low areas remaining. High-risk areas will need to show 5 straight days of no new infections to be reclassified as low risk. And COVID-19 testing will now only be conducted in key spots where cases have been detected. The announcement comes as daily cases topped the 10,000 mark for the first time since April, with daily infections in Beijing hitting their highest in more than a year. The rise in infections has led to tourist attractions closing temporarily in the capital as long queues form for tests on the streets.
And our team is standing by to bring you the latest out of China, Hong Kong and the markets. Let's first go to Olivia Xiong. Ollie, let's start now with this issue of the major changes that China's strict measures have gone through. These are moves that the public and businesses, they've been waiting for this for a long time. What's the reaction been like?
Well, the move has generally been welcomed in China, although there is some caution. But generally, people are reacting well to the changes that potentially would make international travel a little bit easier, top of which is the reduction in the quarantine requirement to now 8 days, 5 of which are spent in a centralized facility and 3 at home. That's down from a total of 10 days, 7 of which are spent in a centralized quarantine and 3 at home. Also, other changes being welcome are a reduction in the pre-departure PCR test requirements. Now only 1 test is required. That's down from 2. Also, the suspension of a rule that had stopped flights from entering the country if a certain number of COVID-19 cases had been detected. Now, Chinese travel platform Trip.com Group said that in the hour after the announcement was made, it had seen bookings and searches for flights into China double compared to the same period yesterday. Also, I spoke to several foreign business groups who say they welcome the move and any sort of easing of these strict COVID-19 measures that have been in place these few years, which has made doing business extremely difficult. Have a listen.
To do business in China, you really need to interact. You really need to come over here to inspect your businesses, to interact with the government agencies, and your suppliers, so to speak. So it has slowed down the process a great deal for many. Yeah. So with this, hopefully, with this reduction, hopefully it will encourage more people to travel and make it less painful to travel.
But companies are also hoping that more can be done, especially as it says the base case for China is comparing itself to other countries that have already opened its borders and relaxed its COVID-19 curbs.
One additional area that people are suffering now is actually domestic travel. So within China now, people are very worried about what's getting called a pop-up window. So on your health code on your phone, if you travel, for example, outside of Beijing to an area with cases and you come back, you might be forced to do quarantine. So today's announcement of the 5+3 quarantine, again, a reduction of what you needed to do coming in internationally. However, a pain point continues to be domestic travel is also still quite limited.
Ollie, these, it's the biggest pullback we've seen yet. But how significant is this easing? How's it going to actually dovetail, this calibration? How's it going to dovetail with China's zero COVID policy?
All these measures are coming at a time when we have seen the data. We know the toll that these strict COVID-19 measures have taken on China's economy as well as people's livelihoods, as we have also seen a growing dissatisfaction that has been expressed by the public. And so in reacting to these latest changes, netizens on Chinese social media are saying that while they welcome the move, they are also waiting to see how these latest changes will be implemented. This especially as China has continued to tighten some of the measures as it sees a new flare-up of cases in the country, especially in big cities like Guangzhou, Beijing, and Zhengzhou, as well as we have seen more communities being placed under lockdown and people placed under quarantine, with the number of cases in the country exceeding the 10,000 mark today. Also, the measure, the signal from the Chinese leaders is still very clear that China is not changing its zero COVID policy. Yesterday, at a meeting among its top standing committee members, the Chinese leadership saying that the measures should not be relaxed, but what instead is being done is to make improvements to minimize the impact that these measures have on China's economy.
Ollie, thank you for that. Olivia Xiong there with the latest on China's easing of COVID curbs.
On China's latest COVID move, something that has been much anticipated in Hong Kong. Let's check in with CNA's Deborah Wong, who is watching developments in the financial hub. Deborah, tell us more about sentiment on the ground. How have people in Hong Kong reacted to the news from the mainland?
Well, it's definitely a step in the right direction. You know, today Hong Kong has already gradually reopened to the world. But earlier this year was a completely different story because Hong Kong's COVID-19 policies have always been closely intertwined with China's zero COVID policy. So what that meant was we saw international arrivals coming to Hong Kong having to serve up to 21 days of quarantine. And there was also a period where there were supply chain disruptions at the Shenzhen border because cargo drivers were subjected to testing as well as quarantine arrangements. And so for the better part of the pandemic, Hong Kong has always prioritized reopening of the mainland, and essentially that kind of led to its isolation. And that reduced access to the mainland, it actually had an impact on Hong Kong's status as a gateway to China. So we did speak to some tech companies earlier this year, especially over the last few months. And these companies have a presence as well as assembly lines in the mainland. And they told us that they've had to pivot to domestic projects instead, as well as explore more opportunities in other markets, such as in Southeast Asia. And on top of the immigration wave that we've been seeing over the last 3 years, today Hong Kong authorities just announced that it will be downgrading its full-year economic forecast to a 3.2% contraction. So what this means is that China's policies do have a direct impact on Hong Kong. And when the announcement broke today, we went out to speak to Hong Kong residents, and we asked them, how do you feel about the easing of measures? And they all say that they are positive, they are hopeful that this would potentially signal and set the stage for China's reopening and, by association, Hong Kong's economic comeback. Have a listen.
好開心咯！好多人都想返大陸嘅而家，因為好多親人都離別咗幾年㗎啦嘛，疫情，所以大陸應該再放寬啲啦。
I do have friends who went up for work and were stuck in quarantine for a while and had to come back down. And so I think it was a very taxing experience. And so I think generally this is a great piece of news for everyone. Yeah.
And we look forward to them coming here and we going there. You see all the shops here. Many are suffering because of no tourism. So once they start, then tourism goes ahead, business moves, everything will start back normal.
Deborah, as you mentioned earlier, Hong Kong policy on COVID intertwined with what happens on the Chinese mainland. So these changes, what do they mean for cross-border connectivity with China?
So certainly all eyes right now are on whether the Hong Kong authorities will announce the launch date of its reverse quarantine plan that it has with the Shenzhen authorities. So currently, travellers in Hong Kong can only enter Shenzhen after they ballot successfully for a spot, because there is a daily quota of about 1,500 spots. And when they ballot successfully, they need to be quarantined in Shenzhen for about 7 days before undergoing home isolation for 3 days. So the proposed reverse quarantine plan essentially means that travellers from Hong Kong will first serve their quarantine in the city before entering Shenzhen. But details such as the isolation period, daily testing requirement, as well as whether there will be any changes to the daily quota, they have not been reviewed yet, because authorities are saying that this is the first time such a system, such a proposal has ever been mooted. So they do need time to work out the details and align safety standards with the Chinese authorities. But hopefully today's announcement will pave the way for more clarity on this proposal down the road. Back to you.
Thanks for that, Deborah. Deborah Wong reporting live just there from Hong Kong.
Well, let's bring in Elizabeth Nyo now to tell us how the markets reacted to China's easing of those COVID-19 curbs.
Well, thanks, Dawn. Well, greater Chinese markets rebounding today on the back of news of that easing after several false starts. Investors, they have been hoping that Beijing will relax some of its strict COVID-19 curbs, and restrictions, as you know, have disrupted manufacturing and hurt consumer confidence in China. Well, the domestic benchmark CSI 300 index rose as much as 4% before ending about 3% higher. Meantime, Shanghai and Shenzhen, they also closed in the green as well. And that easing also spurred a surge in the yuan. In fact, it strengthened to as high as 7.065 per dollar, and that is its strongest since late September. Now, the recovery in risk appetite spilled over to Hong Kong markets as well. The Hang Seng jumping nearly 8% at the close, which is its biggest daily gain since March, and that is powered by higher tech stocks. Meantime, the Hang Seng Tech Index soared some 10% today. Hong Kong's stock markets had been weighed by China's strict curbs as well. And those restrictions have been denting trade and tourism, in turn curtailing Hong Kong's economic growth.